The rain fell on the manicured lawns of the Greenwood Cemetery with a quiet, expensive hush, the kind of rain that seemed to know it was watering the graves of the immensely powerful. Each drop was a tiny, perfect jewel, clinging to the marble. Angels and granite obelisks that marked the final resting places of the city's titans. This was not a place of public grief. It was a private park of eternal prestige, its gates open only to the families whose names were etched onto the city's skyscrapers, hospitals, and university halls, and there was no name more powerful, more etched into the very fabric of the city, than Blackwood. Victoria Blackwood, the 62-year-old matriarch of the Blackwood Industries empire, stood before the most imposing mausoleum in the entire cemetery. It was a stark, minimalist temple of black granite, a monument to her grief and her power, bearing a single, elegant name, Adrian. She held a bouquet of pristine white lilies, their petals unblemished by the soft, persistent rain. She came here every month, a solemn, private ritual to mourn the son she had lost, the heir she had molded, the future of her dynasty, which had died with him in a fiery car crash 3 years ago. But today, the sanctity of her grief was violated. Were two figures standing before her son's grave, a young woman and a small child. They were trespassers in her sacred space, an anomaly in her carefully ordered world. Something about their presence, the quiet intimacy with which they stood before the granite wall, made her heart, a muscle she had long since trained into submission, give a strange, unfamiliar lurch. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the gentle patter of the rain like a shard of ice. "This is a private moment. I believe you're in the wrong place." The young woman, who had been kneeling, her hand resting on the cold stone, slowly lifted her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her expression a mixture of sorrow and a startling, unexpected composure. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but carrying a quiet dignity that Victoria had not expected to find here, in this place of profound loss. I didn't know anyone else was coming today." "Who are you?" Victoria asked, her ruthless instincts kicking in, overriding the initial shock. "And why are you crying at my son's grave?" The child, a boy of about 4 who had been hiding behind the woman's legs, looked up at Victoria, and in that moment, the world, for Victoria Blackwood, tilted on its axis. The boy had bright, intelligent, and piercingly green eyes she knew as well as her own, eyes she saw in her own reflection in the mirror every single morning. They were Adrienne's eyes. "My name is Jasmine Washington," the young woman replied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, her movements slow and deliberate. "And this is Tyler. I work at Bell's Diner, in town. I come here every month because—" She hesitated, her gaze dropping for a moment to the small boy at her side. "Because Adrienne was very important to us." Victoria felt the world spin, the manicured green lawns of the cemetery seeming to warp and bend around her. Adrienne, he had died 3 years ago, at the age of 28, taking with him all of her hopes, all of her dreams, the entire future of the Blackwood family dynasty. In the raw, brutal aftermath of his death, she had done what she always did when faced with a problem she could not control. She had investigated. She had hired the best private investigators in the country to reconstruct every second of her son's life, searching for a reason, for a meaning, for anything that could explain the senseless, random cruelty of his loss. They had found nothing. No secret addictions, no dangerous liaisons, no evidence of any serious romantic relationships, let alone a child. "Important how?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave. The rain began to fall harder now, but none of the 3 of them seemed to notice. Jasmine looked up, her dark eyes meeting Victoria's with a courage, a directness, that surprised the billionaire. "Because Tyler is his son," she said simply, "and because I promised Adrian that I would always take care of him, no matter what." The bouquet of white lilies slipped from Victoria's numb fingers. The perfect, pristine flowers scattered across the cold, wet stone of the grave like a final, impossible offering. 3 years. 3 years she had mourned the death of her only son, believing that her bloodline, her legacy, the entire purpose of her carefully constructed life, had died with him. And now, in a cold, rainy cemetery, she was discovering that it had not. She had a grandson, a black grandson. A grandson being raised by a waitress from a diner, a grandson living a life she could not have even begun to imagine. But as she stared at Jasmine, at the quiet, unshakable dignity in her eyes, Victoria saw something else. It was not the look of a desperate, grieving single mother. It was something more complex. There was a caution there, a hidden fear, a sense that she was guarding secrets far bigger, far more dangerous, than just the existence of her son. What Victoria Blackwood didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this stunning, life-altering revelation was not a coincidence. It was the first, carefully placed thread in a vast, intricate web of lies, of betrayals, of secrets, that involved people very close to her, people she trusted implicitly. And she had no idea that Jasmine Washington's apparent vulnerability, her simple, working-class facade, hid a strength, an intelligence, and a determination that was about to shake the very foundations of Victoria's perfect, privileged, and profoundly corrupt world. For the next 2 weeks, the private library of the Blackwood mansion, a room that had once been a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, was transformed into a war room. The century-old hand-carved mahogany table was covered not with rare first editions, but with the glossy, detailed reports of private investigators. Each page revealed a new, frustratingly simple detail about the life of Jasmine Washington, details that left Victoria feeling increasingly, maddeningly, disturbed. Single, no known family, other than an aunt in Chicago, works 60 hours a week at 2 different jobs to support the child. Victoria muttered to herself, her manicured fingernails tapping a frantic, impatient rhythm on the polished wood. Lives in a 1-bedroom apartment on the poor side of town, no formal education beyond a high school diploma. She looked up at her personal assistant, David Chen, a man who had been her loyal, silent shadow for the past 15 years. It makes no sense, David. It's too simple. David stood silently beside her armchair, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He had seen Victoria Blackwood destroy corporate empires, crush competitors, and bring powerful men to their knees with less emotion than she was showing now. What about the child's mother? Victoria asked, her icy blue eyes fixed on a grainy long-lens photograph of Tyler playing in a public playground. The biological mother, that Victoria, David said, opening a separate, much thinner folder, is where it gets interesting. We can't find her. There is no birth certificate for a Tyler Washington born in this state, or any neighboring state, approximately 4 years ago. There are no hospital records. There is no official documentation of any kind about who gave birth to this child. It's as if his biological mother never existed. Victoria's fingers stopped their frantic tapping. A cold, unsettling stillness settled over her. 3 years ago, in the depths of her grief, she had investigated every second of Adrian's life. She had looked for meaning, for clues, for anything that would justify the random, senseless cruelty of his death. She had never found any evidence of a serious relationship, of a secret life. It was as if her son had been exactly who she had raised him to be, a handsome, charming, and emotionally distant heir to an empire. A man who moved through the world with a kind of careless, privileged grace, leaving no deep attachments in his wake. Schedule a meeting with this Jasmine, Victoria said finally, the name feeling foreign and unpleasant on her tongue. In my office, tomorrow, 2 o'clock. The next day, Jasmine Washington arrived at the gleaming, monolithic headquarters of Blackwood Industries wearing her best, and only, suit. It was a simple, dark gray ensemble she had purchased from a thrift store years ago for job interviews that had never materialized. The 60-story building of glass and steel seemed to challenge her to enter, its reflective walls showing her a distorted, out-of-place version of herself. Victoria welcomed her into her office on the top floor, a space so large, so minimalist, so breathtakingly opulent that it was clearly designed to intimidate. The panoramic view of the city, spread out like a map at her feet, was a calculated display of power, and they both knew it. Sit down, Victoria said, gesturing not to one of the plush visitors' chairs, but to a single, hard-backed chair that had been strategically positioned lower than her own, forcing Jasmine to look up at her. I'd rather stand, thank you, Jasmine replied, her voice calm, her posture erect. As you wish, Victoria said, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She opened a folder on her desk, the same folder of investigative reports. I've looked into you, Miss Washington. 2 jobs, no savings, living in conditions that are, frankly, unsuitable for a child, especially a Blackwood child. Tyler is well cared for, and he is loved, Jasmine replied, her voice still calm, but now infused with a new, steely firmness. Victoria smiled, that same cold, humorless smile she reserved for business negotiations she was about to win. I'm sure you do your best, with what you have. But a Blackwood child deserves more than your best. He deserves the best that money can buy. And what, exactly, are you suggesting? Victoria slid a check across the vast, polished expanse of her desk. It was made out to Jasmine Washington. The amount was $200,000. To start, Victoria said, Tyler comes to live with me. He gets the education he deserves, the opportunities he is entitled to, the future that Adrian would have wanted for him. You can visit him, of course, on the weekends. Jasmine stared at the check as if it were a poisonous snake. Are you trying to buy my son? He's not your son, Victoria snapped, her thin veneer of civility beginning to crack. He is my grandson. He is blood of my blood. And frankly, a 20-something waitress with a high school education cannot possibly offer him what a family like ours can. Family. Jasmine laughed. It was a short, sharp, bitter sound. Victoria, she said, the deliberate use of her first name, a small, satisfying act of rebellion. May I call you Victoria? You want to talk about family? Tyler has called me Mum for 3 years. I am the one who wakes up with him in the middle of the night when he has nightmares about the thunder. I am the one who teaches him his numbers at our small kitchen table. I am the one who reads him bedtime stories until he falls asleep. That, Victoria, is family. Victoria stood up, her height, amplified by her expensive heels, towering over Jasmine. Noble sentiments, Miss Washington, but reality is a harsh and unforgiving thing. You work like a slave to pay a rent that probably consumes half of your income. Tyler deserves private schools. He deserves trips around the world. He deserves opportunities that you can never, ever give him. And he deserves unconditional love. Jasmine replied, her voice now a low, dangerous whisper. Something you clearly didn't give your own son. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria felt as if she had been slapped. How dare you? Adrian told me about you, Jasmine continued, her voice low but cutting, each word a precisely aimed dart. He told me about the missed parent-teacher conferences, the football games you never attended, the birthdays where you sent expensive, impersonal gifts, delivered by your assistants. She took a step closer, her eyes boring into Victoria's. You don't want Tyler because you love him. You want him because he's a second chance, a do-over, a way to finally get the heir you always wanted, a way to clear your own guilty conscience. Victoria clenched her fists, her manicured nails digging into her palms. You don't know me, no, Jasmine agreed. But I knew your son. And I know exactly why he never told you about Tyler. She reached out, took the check from the desk, and tore it in half. The 2 pieces of paper fluttered to the floor like wilted, defeated petals. Tyler is not for sale. Then we'll do this the hard way, Victoria said, her voice now taking on a dangerous, glacial edge. I have resources, Miss Washington, that you cannot even begin to imagine. I have the best lawyers, the best investigators, connections, at every level of government in this city. I can, and I will, prove that a single mother with no formal education, living in poverty, is not a suitable guardian for a child, especially not for the heir to the Blackwood fortune. Jasmine smiled, for the first time since she had entered the office, and something in that smile, something calm, something knowing, something utterly, terrifyingly confident, made Victoria hesitate. Victoria, Jasmine said softly, you're assuming that I'm just a poor, uneducated waitress that you can intimidate and crush, but there are things about me, about Tyler, and about your son Adrian that you haven't discovered yet. And when you do, she paused, her eyes flashing with a fire that surprised the billionaire. Well, let's just say your investigators aren't nearly as good as you think they are. She headed for the door, pausing only to look back over her shoulder. And Victoria, the next time we talk about Tyler's future, it will be on my terms, not yours. After Jasmine had left, Victoria stood alone in her vast, silent office, the floor still littered with the torn pieces of her check. For the first time in decades, someone had walked away from a negotiation with her holding all the cards. What she couldn't understand, what her entire life of power and privilege could not compute, was why a simple waitress displayed such unshakable, infuriating confidence. It was as if Jasmine knew something, some secret, some hidden card up her sleeve, that rendered all of Victoria's immense wealth and power utterly, completely irrelevant. And even more disturbing, for the first time in her life, Victoria Blackwood, the woman who studied everyone, who evaluated everyone, who saw through everyone, had the distinct, chilling feeling that she was the one being watched, being studied, being evaluated, and that the person on the other side of the glass was not at all impressed with what she saw. 3 days after the disastrous confrontation in her office, Victoria received a phone call that left her stunned, and for the first time, genuinely afraid. Her lead attorney, Richard Thornton, a man who had handled the Blackwood family's legal affairs for 20 years, a man whose voice was usually a calm, reassuring baritone, sounded nervous. "Victoria," he said, his voice tense, "I need to tell you something about the custody case. I just received a call from Miss Washington's legal representation. She hired a lawyer." Victoria laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "With what money? It must be some unprepared, overworked public defender." "Actually, Victoria," Richard paused, "it's Morrison, Caldwell, and Pierce. They're representing her, pro bono." Victoria nearly spilled her coffee. Morrison, Caldwell, and Pierce was one of the top 3 law firms in the country, a legal behemoth that specialized in high-stakes civil rights cases and was known for never ever losing a major court battle. That's impossible," she stammered. "Why would they possibly be interested in some waitress from the Bronx?" "I don't know," Victoria, her lawyer, replied, "but there's more. They've already filed a preventative petition with the court. They're claiming that any attempt on our part to forcibly remove the child from Miss Washington's care would constitute legal kidnapping based on socio-economic and racial discrimination." Victoria hung up the phone, her hand trembling. Jasmine had played her first card, and it was a much more powerful card than Victoria had ever imagined possible. Meanwhile, in Jasmine's modest one-bedroom apartment, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. The small living room was crowded with people Victoria would never have expected to find there. Dr. Michael Chen, a renowned professor of law at Columbia University. Amanda Torres, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, known for her ruthless exposés on corporate corruption. And at the center of it all, an elegant, sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s. A woman whom Jasmine treated with a clear, profound affection and respect. "Aunt Helen," Jasmine said, hugging the woman tightly. "Thank you for coming. I know it was a long flight from Chicago." Helen Washington smiled, her intelligent eyes sparkling with the same fierce, determined fire that Jasmine had shown in Victoria's office. "Child," she said, her voice a warm, powerful alto, "when you called me and said the time had finally come, I cancelled every appointment on my schedule. We have been waiting for this moment for 3 long years." Little Tyler played on the floor with a set of building blocks, blissfully unaware of the importance of the conversation swirling around him. Dr. Chen opened a thick, bulging folder filled with documents and photographs. "Jasmine, are you sure you want to go through with this?" he asked, his expression serious. "Once we start, there is no turning back. Victoria Blackwood has immense resources, and she will not hesitate to use every single one of them to destroy you." "Dr. Chen," Jasmine replied, her voice calm but determined, "I have been preparing for this moment for the past 3 years. Every night class I've taken, every law book I've read, every contact I've cultivated. It has all been for this, protect Tyler, and to honor Adrienne's memory." Amanda Torres, the journalist, looked up from her laptop. "The evidence you've gathered is impressive, Jasmine. More than impressive. It's a bombshell. 3 years of meticulous documentation of Blackwood Industries' questionable business practices, bribes to local politicians, systematic labor violations, environmental cover-up." Helen walked over to the window, looking out at the modest, gritty view of the Bronx. "Victoria thinks her wealth makes her untouchable," she said, her voice a low, angry hum. "She has no idea that my niece has spent the last 3 years studying her every move, her every dirty deal, her every tax evasion scheme. Aunt Helen taught business law at the University of Chicago for 30 years, Jasmine explained to the others. "She's the one who taught me that knowledge is the only weapon they can't buy or steal from you." Jasmine's phone rang. It was Victoria, her voice a furious, panicked hiss. "What game are you playing?" she shrieked. "Morrison, Caldwell, and Pierce. How does a waitress get lawyers of that caliber?" Jasmine put the phone on speaker, allowing everyone in the room to hear. "Victoria," she said, her voice calm and even, "I warned you that there were things about me you hadn't discovered yet. I don't care what tricks you're using. Tyler is my grandson, and I have unlimited resources to get what I want." "Unlimited resources." Jasmine smiled, looking at her allies, her army. "Victoria, you're assuming that money is the only kind of power there is. But what if I told you there's something much more powerful? And what would that be?" "The truth," Jasmine replied simply. "The truth doesn't pay for expensive lawyers." Victoria retorted. "You're right," Jasmine agreed. "But the truth about your illegal business dealings, about how you built your empire through fraudulent contracts and systematic bribery, that truth is worth much more than money to certain people." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "You're bluffing," Victoria finally said. but her voice had lost all of its previous confidence. "Amanda Torres from the Metropolitan Journal would like to speak with you," Jasmine said, handing the phone to the reporter. "Good afternoon, Ms. Blackwood," Amanda said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm just finishing up an investigative series on questionable corporate practices in the real estate sector. I'd like to give you the opportunity to comment on the allegations we've documented before we go to print." Victoria hung up immediately. Helen smiled, a slow, satisfied smile. "Jasmine, you have learned well. Never attack your enemy head-on when you can flank them." Dr. Chen closed his briefcase. "The legal strategy is solid. We have precedents where attempts to remove a child from a stable home based purely on socioeconomic status have been deemed discriminatory and unconstitutional. And I," Amanda added, "have 3 years of research on every dirty deal Victoria Blackwood has ever made. Contracts with shell companies, suspicious payments to public officials, covered-up environmental violations, enough to destroy any reputation, no matter how powerful." Jasmine picked up Tyler, who was now sleeping in her arms, his small face peaceful and innocent. "What Victoria doesn't understand," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper, "is that I'm not just fighting for Tyler, I'm fighting against an entire system, a system that believes that money can buy everything, including the right to destroy families." Helen approached, placing a gentle hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "Your mother would be so proud of you, daughter," she said softly. "She always said that education was the only inheritance no one could ever take away from you, Aunt." "Helen raised me after my parents died," Jasmine explained to the others. "She taught me that it doesn't matter where you come from, but where you're going. And she taught me that sometimes, to protect the people you love, you have to be willing to go to war." The phone rang again. This time, it was Victoria's lawyer, Richard Thornton. His voice was no longer nervous, it was pleading. Mr. Washington," he said, "my client would like to propose a settlement, $500,000, and supervised visits with the child." Jasmine looked at her allies. They all shook their heads. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice as cold and as hard as steel, "please inform your client that Tyler is not for sale at any price. And tell her that she has 48 hours to publicly withdraw any and all legal threats against my family, or else..." "Or else what?" "Or else, on Monday morning, the Metropolitan Journal will publish a full front-page series on the questionable business practices of Blackwood Industries. And I am quite certain that the IRS, the SEC, and the FBI will be very, very interested in some of the documents we have obtained." After she had hung up, Amanda smiled. "Jasmine, are you ready for this? Once we publish, Victoria will use all of her power, all of her connections, to try to destroy you." Jasmine looked down at Tyler, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Amanda," she said, "I have lived for 3 years knowing that this day would come. Victoria thinks her wealth makes her invincible, but she has never ever faced anyone who has had this much time to prepare." That night, while Tyler slept, Jasmine opened a small, locked trunk in her room. Inside were her diplomas from the night law school she had secretly attended, the certificates from the business management programs she had completed online, the letters of recommendation from the renowned professors who had become her mentors, and at the very bottom, a single, faded photograph. It was a picture of her and Adrian, and a young, smiling woman with fair skin and Adrian's green eyes. The photograph Victoria had never seen. The photograph that explained not only who Tyler's real mother was, but why Jasmine had prepared so meticulously, so patiently, for this very confrontation. Victoria Blackwood was about to discover that underestimating someone can be the most costly, most catastrophic mistake a person can make, and that sometimes the sweetest, most satisfying revenge doesn't come from force, but from patience, from preparation, and from the perfect, devastating moment when you reveal the truths that some people would do anything, absolutely anything, to keep buried. The battle for Tyler's custody was only the first move in a much bigger game. A game that Jasmine had been planning since the day Adrian died. A game that was about to expose secrets that could destroy not only Victoria's reputation, but the entire corrupt empire she had built on a foundation of lies. The next morning, Victoria Ashford woke up with an ironclad, desperate determination. She would not be intimidated. She would not be played. She would seize control of this situation. She would fire the nanny, pay her a generous severance, to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and this entire sordid affair would be buried. At 8 a.m. she was already dressed in a severe grey power suit, standing by the front gate, a letter of termination and a checkbook in her hand, waiting. When Leticia arrived, not on her bicycle, but in a simple late-model sedan. Victoria was momentarily thrown off. Leticia got out of the passenger side, and the man driving, Marcus Thompson, got out as well. He carried a thick leather briefcase. "Don't even come in," Victoria announced, her voice a sharp, commanding bark as they approached the gate. "Your services are no longer required. This letter formalizes your immediate dismissal. My lawyer will be in touch regarding a severance package, contingent on a signed NDA." Leticia accepted the envelope with that same infuriatingly serene smile. "Are you sure you want to do this today, Victoria?" "Absolutely," Victoria snapped. "And it's Mrs. Ashford to you." "Actually," Leticia said, opening her own purse and taking out a crisp, professional-looking folder, "I prefer it's just Victoria, or, better yet, defendant number 1. Victoria felt the blood drain from her veins. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Dr. Leticia Santos," she said, handing Victoria a business card. The card was thick, expensive cardstock, the lettering embossed, in a simple, elegant font, "Dr. Leticia Santos, Ph.D., Columbia University, Masters in Civil Law, Harvard Law School." Underneath, it read, "Specialist in Racial Discrimination and Labor Rights Violations." Victoria stared at the card as if it were a poisonous snake. "That's impossible," she stammered. You're just a black nanny," Leticia finished for her. "A maid, someone who should be grateful to work in your refined home." She smiled. "For 3 years, Victoria, I have meticulously, legally, and comprehensively documented every racist word that has come out of your mouth, every despicable comment, every single humiliation you thought I wouldn't understand, or wouldn't remember. You deceived me," Victoria whispered, her mind reeling. "You lied about who you were." "I never lied," Leticia corrected her. "I just didn't reveal my academic background. I was conducting ethnographic research for my doctoral thesis. The title," she added, a glint of steel in her eye, "is The Banality of Evil, a case study of systemic domestic racism in high-income American families. You, Victoria, are my perfect case study." "It doesn't matter who you are," Victoria said, trying to regain some semblance of control. "You can't prove anything." Leticia took a small digital recorder out of her bag. "Want to hear your conversation with your lawyer, David Sterling, yesterday, the part where you say that people like me are too sensitive, and that your racist comments were just realism?" She pressed a button, and Victoria's own voice, crisp and clear, filled the quiet morning air. "It wasn't discrimination, it was just realism. I pay her salary, I provide her with housing and food." "Stop it," Victoria screamed, trying to grab the recorder. "Or would you prefer this one?" Leticia played another file. Victoria's voice again, this time on the phone with her friend Catherine. "These people, they always want more than they deserve." Victoria recoiled, her face pale with horror. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Money. I'll double your salary. Triple it. I want justice," Leticia said. "And at 10 o'clock this morning, a special investigative report will be airing on Channel 7 News. It's called The Silent Racism of the Elite. It's an exclusive, featuring 3 years of my recordings, photographs, and documents, showing exactly how millionaire families like yours treat their black domestic employees." "You can't do that," Victoria breathed. "I already have," Leticia replied. "My lawyer, Marcus Thompson, has been working with a journalist for the past 2 weeks. Your friends, Catherine, Rebecca, Samantha, they're all featured in the report as well. It turns out, I wasn't the only employee they underestimated." Victoria felt her legs go weak. "My God, my reputation, my husband's business, the contracts. Your contracts have already started to be cancelled," Leticia informed her calmly. "Premier Holdings, your husband's biggest client, terminated their agreement an hour ago, after their CEO was given an advanced screening of the report. The charitable foundation you chair has already removed your name from their board, and the country club, well, they've asked for your membership card back." Victoria collapsed against the cold iron of the gate, sobbing, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her in a matter of minutes. "What?" she wept. "Why are you doing this to me?" Leticia knelt beside her, her voice firm but, for the first time, not entirely without a sliver of pity. "Because for 3 years, you treated me like I was less than human," she said. "Because you laughed at my background, you mocked my dignity, and you genuinely believed that your wealth and your privilege protected you from the consequences of your words. You never saw me, Victoria. You only ever saw a stereotype. I never meant to. You never wanted to take responsibility for what you said and did." Leticia corrected her. "Every racist comment you normalized in front of your son, every moment you made me feel inferior, Every time you talked about me as if I were your property, all of that had consequences. Victoria looked up at Leticia through her tears. What's going to happen now? Now, Leticia said, standing up, you are going to learn something I have known my entire life. Actions have consequences, and underestimating someone because of the color of their skin was the single biggest, most catastrophic mistake of your privileged life. She turned to leave. Oh, and about little James, she added, her voice softening. Don't worry. I'm sure he will learn a great deal from watching his mother finally have to deal with the consequences of her own prejudices. As Leticia and Marcus got back in their car and drove away, Leticia could see Victoria's reflection in the side mirror, a crumpled, sobbing heap at the gates of her own empty kingdom. She felt no pleasure in her pain. She felt only a profound, weary relief. The relief that comes when the truth has finally, after so long in the darkness, been brought into the light. When she arrived at Marcus's office, he greeted her with a proud, triumphant smile. The report is a firestorm, he said. It's being shared all over social media. We've already been contacted by lawyers representing other domestic workers from Victoria's social circle. You haven't just won your own battle, Leticia. You've started a movement. Leticia nodded, feeling the weight of 3 long years of silence finally lifting from her shoulders. Justice wasn't sweet. It was necessary, and sometimes, for it to happen, it takes brave, intelligent, and incredibly patient people to go undercover, to document the truth, and to wait for the perfect moment for all the masks to come off. For good. 6 months after the expos that rocked the American social elite, Dr. Leticia Santos sat in her new office in downtown Manhattan. The sign on the door read, "The Santos Institute for Social Justice and Labor Rights." The explosive news report, and the subsequent class action lawsuit, had sparked a national wave of awareness about domestic racism and the hidden abuses within the homes of the wealthy. Prestigious universities had offered her professorships, publishers were in a bidding war for her research, and civil rights organizations had partnered with her to create the Institute, a powerful new organization dedicated to fighting for the rights of domestic workers across the country. Victoria Ashford, meanwhile, had lost almost everything. Her husband, horrified by the public scandal and the financial ruin it had brought upon his company, had filed for divorce. The mansion was sold to pay the massive settlement in the class action lawsuit that Leticia's case had spawned. Her friends, the Catherines and Rebeccas of the world, had shunned her, terrified of being tainted by her public disgrace. She now lived in a modest rented apartment, her name a permanent synonym for elite, racist hypocrisy. But there had been an unexpected, and perhaps hopeful, turn. After months of court-mandated therapy and community service, Victoria had reached out to Leticia. She had offered a formal, public apology, and a donation of $50,000, all the money she had left after the legal battles, to the new institute. It doesn't erase the past, Leticia had told her firmly, but it can be the first step toward building a different future for yourself. 2 years later, Victoria was working as a volunteer at a community center in the Bronx, teaching English to new immigrants. It was humble, unpaid work, but for the first time in her life, she felt she was contributing to something larger than her own ego. Leticia's institute had become a national force for change, successfully lobbying for new laws protecting domestic workers and winning landmark cases against other wealthy families who had believed themselves to be above the law. The truest victory, Leticia often told her students and colleagues, was not in the humiliation of Victoria Ashford. It was in the empowerment of the thousands of other Leticias of the world. It was in the creation of a system where their voices could no longer be ignored. On the wall of her office, there was a framed photograph. It was of her and James, Victoria's son, sitting at the small kitchen table in her old apartment, drawing. James, who was now in the custody of his paternal grandparents after his father had also divorced Victoria, visited her regularly. Away from the toxic, prejudiced environment of his mother's home, he was thriving. Next to the photo was a small, simple plaque. The Institute's motto, "The greatest revenge against prejudice is not to destroy those who discriminate. It is to build a world where discrimination is impossible." Victoria Ashford had tried to break Leticia Santos, but in doing so, she had only succeeded in forging a leader. And Leticia, in turn, had learned that true justice is not about punishing those who have hurt us. It is about ensuring that no one else ever has to endure the same pain. Their story had become a powerful, enduring testament to the idea that when the privileged and the powerful underestimate the quiet, invisible people who move through their world, they are not just being cruel, they are digging their own moral, and often, literal, graves. Because in the end, those who have the courage to document the truth, and the intelligence to use it as a weapon, will always defeat those who use only arrogance and money.